Gabe has an interesting proposal here. He's saying that he's asking if refusing 2 chromosomes can be used to prove that Adam and Eve didn't happen. I'm not sure about this premise here, Gabe. You're live on with us on Truth Wanted. Can you explain your premise to us a bit more?
Hello.
Hello.
I was trying to. I was I guess continuing the conversation I had with Forrest before about disproving Adam and Eve, and I was going to ask if I can use the fusing of chromosome 2 to disprove the myth of Adam and Eve.
I don't think you can, but okay, I'll hear it.
No, well, could you explain it? Could you explain chromosome 2? How the fusing of chromosome 2 works?
You're going to need to make the argument here, I think, Forrest.
Yeah, it's odd. So the chromosome 2 is a fusion of 2 other chromosomes. So when we talk about like our split from the chimpanzee lineage, right? We don't mean that we actually came from chimpanzees, but chimpanzees and us, we share a common ancestor, lived about 7 to 9 million years ago. And the one biggest difference, like that you can notice genetically between humans and either chimps or bonobos, which are both our closest relatives, is that they have an extra set of chromosomes that we don't have. And so we have 23 pairs, they have 24 pairs. And to just lose a whole pair of chromosomes like that would be lethal. Like there's not enough time for that to have phased out naturally. And so this is a big problem for evolution, but instead, indeed, when we look at chromosome number 2 in humans, we see that it's actually 2 different chromosomes fused together. And we can tell that because chromosomes have certain markers on them. At the very ends, they have these things called telomeres. In the center, they have things called centromeres. And so if 2 chromosomes were to fuse together in what's called a Robertsonian translocation, which means one just stacks on top of the other one, then you would expect to find telomeres on the ends and also in the middle, and 2 centromeres kind of halfway up both sides, one of them probably deactivated. And that is exactly what we see when we look at chromosome number 2. And so this is an explanation now. It's a way that we have, kind of fixed this problem that we had. We were like, oh crap, we don't know where this thing went. There it is. Now it's solving an issue with the theory of evolution. It doesn't disprove Adam and Eve. A creationist would very easily just say, yeah, that's how God did it. God did it that way. So like, I think it's important that when we talk about these things, the fusion of chromosome number 2 is definitive evidence for evolution. It is not evidence against any magical claim. A magical claim needs evidence for itself. And that is the best evidence against creationism, is that there is no evidence for creationism. You know what I mean? And so like, that if you're calling to say like this is a good reason to not be a creationist, I agree. But to say that it disproves Adam and Eve, any creationist out there is just going to say that God works in this way, or that this was a mark left by the devil, that just like the fossils were buried by the devil, or some other damn thing to skirt around the fact that it's magic.
Okay. Also, I remember Gutsick Given said that another way to disprove the myth of Adam and Eve was to point it out of Africa. Well, I didn't know how to can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so there's 2 out of Africa events in human history, and so the word, and it's important to clarify, the word human can either mean our species, Homo sapiens, or it can mean any member of the genus Homo. So if you say humans evolved 200,000 years ago, that is correct, because that's when our species first appears in the fossil records. If you say humans evolved 2.6 million years ago, you are also correct, because that's when Homo habilis appears in the fossil record, the first member of the genus Homo. So it can be tricky and confusing, but when we talk about out of Africa, the first out of Africa event was 1.8 million years ago with a species called Homo erectus, which was the first member of our lineage to leave Africa, spread across all of Eurasia, and did a bunch of other really cool stuff too. They were the first species to build boats, the first species to build control fire, the first species to cook food, the first species to learn that you can sharpen both sides of a rock. Very neat. But then later we have out of Africa 2 with us. When Homo sapiens evolved, we then also left Africa and then colonized the entire world. So to say this disproves, Adam and Eve, it isn't compatible with the Adam and Eve story. Certainly, it's like the evidence that we have for Out of Africa 2 and Out of Africa 1, the whole evidence that we have for the entirety of human evolution goes against the Adam and Eve story. But if some creationists wanted to come along and say, well, I think the last time you and I spoke, we talked about mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosomal Adam, and there's these like ways that we use poetic language to describe certain singularity events in human evolution. Or they might say, yeah, well, the Garden of Eden was in Africa. And so, yeah, well, then we grew up there and we established a population and then we left, or something else. It's really important to remember that x equals 0 isn't the same as y equals 1. And y equals 1 isn't the same as x equals something other than 1. And so these are different claims. These are different variables. These are different ideas that need their own independent evidence. And so I have plenty of evidence for evolution. Any creationist can come along and either come along with an idea of theistic evolution to say, yes, God did evolution this way. They can come across with deistic evolution to say God set up the universe in such a way that evolution happened on its own. They can come up in a way that to say that actually there was an Adam and Eve story and all of this evidence isn't really evidence. They can do what Answers in Genesis says and say, yes, Adam and Eve is literally true, and they had just extra genes, and that's why we get a variety of human phenotypes today, because Adam and Eve just had all this genetic variety that then spread to all humans, so we all only get one kind of variety. I don't know how any of that works, but whatever. And so any creationist will continue to be dishonest about these things. And so it's really important to support evolution is one thing, attack creationism is another thing. Don't try to use evolution as proof against creationism, because any creationist will just turn around and say, no, because magic. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I understand. Is there any way you can explain the nesting patterns as well? Because I don't understand what she meant by nesting patterns.
Nesting hierarchy?
She said, when I reheard the video, she said something about coming out of Africa, and it's just some nesting patterns. Maybe that's
I don't know.
Hierarchy. I'm not sure.
I think you should go ask Gutsick Gibbon that, because it's her video and not Forrest's video.
I don't know what exactly video you're talking about or what the context of what she was saying there would be. Nesting hierarchies is talking. The concept of nested hierarchies is to deal with taxonomy. It's how we classify organisms. There's this phrase, you can't evolve out of a clade, which is to say, when you're in a family of organisms, you can evolve and become a new thing, but you are still connected fundamentally to that family of organisms. And so humans are great apes, which means we are also old world monkeys, because ape is a type of old world monkey, which means we are also primates, which means we are also mammals, which means we are also tetrapods, which means we are also fish. You can go back and back and back. We didn't change to a point where we are no longer connected to our ancestry. That's what nested hierarchy is all about. But that's a whole other thing that will start all sorts of semantic arguments about later on.
Oh, okay. Yep. All right.
I hope this helps, man.